Hi, I'm Harlan Emil Gruber. Welcome to Portal to the New Earth. Today, I'm really honored to be joined by Steve Nygren, a true visionary that's actually bringing his ideas into reality. He's founded this community in Georgia called Serenbe and is also consulting with other communities around the world. So I'm just really excited to have him here to discuss all of these. So, like I mentioned, Steve, why don't you just introduce yourself in Serenbe and we'll take it from there.
Well, look forward to the conversation and thanks for the invitation to chat with you. I'm a hospitality guy that developed a group of really visionary restaurants in the 70s and 80s. Was fortunate enough to sell those and retired at 49 to our farm on the edge of Atlanta. And then in my 6th year of retirement, I became concerned that urban sprawl was actually going to destroy the rural paradise that we had. This area, I am 25 minutes from the busiest airport in the world. I am 45 minutes from one of the great energetic urban centers with arts and sports and retail and medical services. So I didn't want to pick up and go to some remote place like Joshua Tree. I wanted to stick, my shovel in here and say, we're going to protect this area because I still like to drive 40 minutes to ethnic food and foreign films and all the things that an urban center has. But I didn't want them to destroy it like we have in suburban sprawl. And so that is what led me on my journey that we've been on now for the last 20 some years.
Well, of course, when you say destroy it, a lot of people don't think that's destroying it. The developers go in, they put in these huge suburban tract homes, all cookie cutter. Then they put in a big mall with a big parking lot. They put in the big box stores, and that's what was encroaching where you lived. And that's what we both consider destroyed. We don't really appreciate that way of thinking. And so what you did, which is the concept of new urbanism. You brought in a way that we could live in communities and develop a place that is much more aligned with nature, much more aligned with a lot of human values.
So, yes. So I think two key points you have there. Why do we feel that the pattern of development of the last 5, 6 decades is destructive? And secondly, let's look about what new urbanism is, and that really doesn't. That's a piece of us. That's a fragment of who we are. So we'll unpack those two things right then. I think that the future, 100 years from now, maybe, we're going to look back at this period on the last 50 years as an experiment that didn't really work. When we gave the automobile the dominant position in our society, we had these 1,000-pound metal pieces of things that would transport one person, and we destroyed our whole ecosystem to accommodate these big things that move one person, and it's crazy. And if you look at what's happened, we are now sicker. There's plenty of statistics coming out. We're more depressed than we've ever been. So when I say destroyed, I don't think there are that many positive results from the way we've been developing, and there are alternatives. I didn't enter this thinking that I had an answer. I entered this realizing that what's been going on isn't working, and what are the answers? And it turns out it's pretty common sense. We understood how to handle most of these things 100 years ago, and we have lost our intuitive connection to nature and appreciation of nature in the way we've developed. So that's why I think it's just disturbing and destructive, and I would suspect, reading your book, Portal, you feel the same way. Now, as far as new urbanism, Robert Davis, in doing some of the same things, trying to save an area of the beach on the Florida Panhandle, brought this whole idea of let's bring density in and have a walkable beach community. And we started going there in the 80s, and it's a wonderful beach community. But it's not environmental. New urbanism has nothing to do with environmentalism. It's purely about density. Now, Robert Davis and the group down there, I'm sure they would have loved to have bought or rezoned the greater area, because now just development has all crowded their 80 acres. So they're not this special village community necessarily. It's just everyone's come in next to them. St. Joe, the big timber company, own most of the land around them, and they've developed that. So it's it's dense urban vacation, if you will. So a big thing, everybody thought I was crazy, an idealist. When we started looking at these, how we could develop. And so I put my head down and did what we thought we needed to do. But after the recession, the analysts started looking at developments that were some of the first to step out of it. And it turns out it's environmental communities and walkable communities. So suddenly people started having an interest in what we were doing at Serenbe, because we came to the top of the list on both of being environmental and walkable. So like you and others, people would associate, well, we're a new urbanist community. Well, we are, but we're not. Or that we're an environmental community. We're in the published book of the top 10 environmental communities in the United States, published by the Urban Land Institute. We're the only one with density. So that doesn't describe us either. And then, of course, the agrihood movement started with our farm being, with the houses, because the New York Reporter called it an agrihood. But not all agrihoods or dense are necessarily environmental. So while these are all labels that people use to identify us, they all do identify us, but they do not singularly identify us. So we had to think about, okay, how people want to relate or put us in a category or a tag or a label. And so that's when we really looked at, well, who are we? Well, we're really biophilic, because it's a care and love of all living systems, and that's what this is about. And so we really declared ourselves the community that was using biophilic principles for design. And there are courses at Yale and UVA. But I realized there wasn't really a great organization of people promoting this out of the academic. Tim Beatley with Biophilic Cities for international cities. And so we formed the Biophilic Institute. I was amazed that the Biophilic Institute was an available word. Of course, 10 years ago, when I talk about biophilic, people thought I was, trying to be academic, and how do you spell that, and what is it, and you're crazy, don't put any title on that. And you see today, biophilic design is kind of all over the place.
I think a great example of explaining what biophilic is to give us a rundown on exactly what Serenbe is, because a lot of people watching this don't know. And I could see over your shoulder is this map of the plan of Serenbe, which shows the urban areas and then the agricultural areas and how they're all integrated together. So if you can just give us a description of Serenbe in its entirety and how you came to plan it, just for people that have never even heard of it or know what it is. And like I said, we will show a close-up maybe of that map as you're describing it, but it's very clear over your shoulder.
So we are seeing each other's background today. Unfortunately, your listeners will not have the advantage of that unless you post something up there. So yes, I have our plan behind us. Now, what is that you have in your background?
Great. I found this on this website. I think I sent it to you called Olizoi, someone I
You did.
recently met who's developing communities similar to your vision of communities. And this is an AI generated image. And of course, this recording we're doing is both as a YouTube channel, so people will be able to see us and see all these images. Plus, it gets converted to a podcast. So for the people listening to the podcast, if you want to see this, you just have to go to YouTube and watch the video. So yes, obviously it's a vision similar to what you're thinking of, and of course
Well,
that map behind you. So which I will put into the YouTube video, a close up of the Serenbe layout as you describe it.
so I make that comparison because it helps describe the evolution of Serenbe. This began, as I mentioned, with a concern that this rural area that for various reasons hadn't been touched. It's the only sort of segment of Metro Atlanta this close to the city that had not already been urbanized. And so as I started buying land, and then finally at 900 acres realized I couldn't keep doing that, I called a dear friend, Ray Anderson. Don't know if you're familiar with Ray, but in the environmental world, he's one of the giants. Ray had a carpet company called Interface with carpet squares. And when he was making a pitch to a group in Sweden, they asked him what his environmental story was. And he said, I'll get back to you on that, and came back to his team and said, what's our environmental story? And they gave him Paul Hawken's book, Natural Capitalism. And Ray read that through the night and decided that as a carpet industrialist, he was one of the polluters. And he could not live with that. And he was going to change his company. And it's a whole journey on how Ray did that. And now he was a friend of ours before all this journey. He's been a friend of ours for approaching 40 years. And so we saw Ray go through that. And so then when I was facing my own journey of, oh, what are we going to do? I called Ray. Now, he had just finished being, when the White House created the Council on the Environment in the 90s, he was the first chair. And so I said, Ray, you know all the smart people. Who can you invite to come help me? And so Ray and the Rocky Mountain Institute brought 23 thought leaders here for September of 2000. It was sort of the excitement turned to depression, because there wasn't anyone there that could help me save the land. They were all people that were looking at some of the serious problems we had in air quality, water, the whole environment. And it was like, oh my God, what are we going to do about this? And so, Ray would send me here and there to talk to people. And finally, as I came to the realization, no one was applying these principles on a community scale. And when I first started talking about environment and why we had to do things, people would imagine straw bale houses, communities in domes, very much the picture you have behind you. And everybody thought I was some idealist kook. And I realized that most places that really take idealism to the extreme do not get traction in the real world, especially the financial world that funds these kinds of projects. And so I stopped talking about environment. I stopped talking about the social issues that were plaguing our country. And I started talking about a great place we were going to create that had a focus on art, because through centuries, great places always had an art patron or a church or someone that honored the artists. And the artists are the ones who talk to your soul. And I wanted to make sure our kids and grandkids knew who was growing their food. So we're going to put a focus on agriculture in this great place we're going to do. And we'd love to have education where kids walk to school. So we're going to put an emphasis on education. And then, I'm a baby boomer, lead the baby boom. We want to look at health and wellness as a society. So we really wanted a place that really supported a health and wellness lifestyle. So I talked about those 4 anchors as we move forward. And I stopped talking about all the environmental issues and all things we heard. Today, 20 years into it, we have an incredible community, over 1,000 peoples, and they are corporate media leaders that have moved to Serenbe because it is a great place to live that's drawing creatives and leaders. And guess what? They're learning about all these environmental issues. And now they're taking some of these issues into their fields and their companies. And so we are changing things. The bankers will now fund our projects because we don't think we're a bunch of kooks, because we're showing economic value to be next to a farm, to be next to a forest, to have a walkable community. We're showing the economics of it. And now I can talk about the environmental. And I wasn't an idealist. I was a common sense practical. The concepts we're doing at Serenbe are how we lived 100 years ago, when we knew our farmer, when we ate fresh food. We had to label all these things organic, so that we are clear on it's not full of chemicals versus the way it was. There's nothing we're doing here that's different than we lived 100 years ago, except we have high-speed fiber in our streets. So I'm not losing my internet.
And of course, the map there shows the extent of Serenbe. I don't know how many acres total, but I do believe that only 30% is being developed, for housing and urban areas, and about 70% is kept for agricultural and for forest. That's what it looks like in that picture. So if you want to go into just a little more detail on that, just so we get a clear picture of, how big it is, how many thousands of homes and all of that, just to paint a picture of what Serenbe is.
Well, in my journey back in 2000, as I started looking at other great developments, I mean, you can go all the way back to Davis in California, Prairie Crossing outside Chicago, Seaside, which we talked about, and these great projects that for their time were very inventive. They really didn't change the area around them. Instead, the traditional development just came and got as close to them as they could, so that they could take advantage of the assets. And I wanted to step into this more cautiously, understanding that if I were successful, what it was going to do to the area. I didn't want to be the cause of destroying it when I was trying to save it, and I didn't want that to be the unintended consequences. So I stepped back, and for 2 years, I led a conversation with 500 neighbors, landowners in the 40,000 acre area. Now, some were land speculators. The inherited landowners were divided. Some said, bring on the bulldozers. That's the payday we've been waiting for. And others said, don't you touch this. I want my grandchildren to enjoy the same forests and fields that I grew up in. And then there were people like us who had found this rural paradise on the edge of a metro city. And so we had very diverse groups. But through a 2-year conversation with great food at every meeting, so that people would show up for the food and the socialization rather than the issues in the initial times, we were able to bring 500 property owners together to have some of the most revolutionary zoning in Metro Atlanta in the last century. And we looked at the countryside of England, because after World War II, they realized that they couldn't indulge in this urban sprawl that the automobile was about to unleash on the world. And they put good land laws in. Now, it was quite a trick bringing English land laws to a property rights southern state. Lawyers and land planners thought I was nuts, So we worked only with universities. And so the Texas A&M, the University of Georgia, and Georgia Tech were all people who were, thrilled to look at some of these new concepts looking into the future. And so we were able to bring about a regulation that requires 70% of the land remain in agricultural zoning use. So it can be farms, it can be equestrian, you can timber or recreation, but you cannot clear it for housing. But the 30% that can be developed gets to develop everything in a dense manner that would have been on the other 70%. So if you have 200 acres, you develop the 60 acres, but the remaining acres, the 140, are ended up, for us, we have equestrian areas, we have farms, we have forest, we have recreation. That's in the 70%. There is really no zoning that dances with dense pods and this large a preservation area anywhere in the United States. And we are now showing that the values that the bankers loved in the 80s and 90s that developed all these golf courses, we have brought those same kind of values by backing up to forest and farms. And the Urban Land Institute did a great service. When I was getting ready to do this, they issued the report because they were looking at why we had so many golf course communities being developed. Well, it turns out that 92% of the people who bought those expensive lots play golf twice or less a year. So it means they were buying it for the green space. It really had nothing to do with golf. And now we are one of the proof points that demonstrates that with Serenbe, because we do not have golf, but we do have organic farms and preserved forests.
One of the things before we move on to some of the other things that are offshoots of you developing Serenbe is to just talk just a little bit more about this urban density, this new urbanism that's integrated into this beautiful, open, green space, forest and agricultural land. Because I want to just show a few of those pictures here. We could see over your shoulder the orange areas where you have these horseshoe-shaped roads. And when you get into those areas, what's really interesting too about what you've done there is, of course, you're open to any architecture as long as it's reviewed by a board to make sure it fits certain standards. But it's not like you're extremely strict on the architecture that's there. But when you do see pictures of downtown Serenbe, it looks like it's been there for over 100 years. You do embrace, very old-fashioned or conventional. And I've come to learn, even like I lived in New York City for a long time. And in the 70s, there was this whole modernist, and they started to make things look all slick and modern. But then starting in the 80s and 90s, when I lived there, and they would develop like Battery Park City, they went back to making it look like it was there for 100 years. There's a certain nostalgia that people enjoy to be able to see old brick buildings and old-fashioned street lights. That's very comforting. And that's what it looks like when you see downtown Serenbe. It doesn't look like some new modern 21st century, all slick and Dwell magazine. It looks like these beautiful old loft buildings, from even the 19th, the 1800s, let alone the 20th century. So if you want to just speak for a moment about that, I just did, but you can comment before we move on.
Well, first of all, with the Rocky Mountain Institute I'd mentioned, and we were looking, I shared with them our vision in the English countryside. And they helped me find Phil Tabb, who did his doctorate on the English village system. The other thing we were very interested through our visits in England was sacred geometry. We had been introduced to Keith Critchlow and some of the principles there with our dear friend Alice Crichton, and so that was important to bring that discipline here, and we were looking for someone in the United States that understood what we were talking about. And so we were very fortunate that we connected with Phil, because he was an architect, understood the English village, and was a trained sacred geometrist. And Phil came initially as a consultant and turned into being our land planner. And so because we are with the sacred geometry, those horseshoes, that's the omega pattern that you will see. And that's a simple application to the land, because each omega in the first three communities, they're around some water source, whether it's a stream that flows down through the center, a pond, or a wetland. There is water energy in the low areas. And so the pattern just emerged as we walked the land and studied what we wanted and what the principles. So all of our development is nestled sort of in the valleys, and we saved the ridges of the hills, so you don't have all these houses poking up for ego views, but it's trails, and really you have the sense that it is a community nestled in a forest. And so how we placed our buildings within the land was a key piece. The other thing that, our map, the top is to the north, the bottom the south. So you'll notice all of our streets run north and south. That's the strip of forest that we clear for the housing. But that means we have clear views for solar for all the ridges of our houses. And so rather than the tree blocking you, it's your neighbor's house has been cleared, giving you a clear view to the southern sun. So there's a lot going on with those patterns. The streets weave, so most, even new urbanism, they have a grid for the automobile, and the pedestrians can walk on them, and they might have a side path. Where we're really different from new urbanism is our streets wander. As you see, they go all the way around the omega. But what's overlaid is a pedestrian grid. So if you're at the open edges of those omegas, you can walk straight across. And so what would take you having to go completely around, maybe a mile, you can walk straight across in a few hundred feet. And so there's a lot of magic that happens with that omega pattern as we apply it. And then the agriculture, or the architecture, I mean, as I looked at, once I realized I was going to be a developer, I really looked at the places we loved. And what was the difference between developments and places I love, like Seaside? I love Seaside, but it is a development. And I found that most developments in the last 50 years, they have very specific design guidebooks that has one really architectural style that they tried to lead everyone down. And that looks like a development, nothing wrong with that. But clearly this was done in a certain period of time over a couple decades. And I wanted to build a town that really didn't identify with a decade, that could have been done over a century. And I looked at those kinds of places, and they had varied architecture. You don't have to have one architecture, but it was all good architecture. And I realized, we come back from Europe and we think it's wonderful because it's so old. Well, a big piece of it is the massing. What are the size of the buildings and where are they placed? And so we are very strict on where every building is on a lot along the street. And so we actually define how many feet from the curb the facade of that building is. And we prescribe, we require the height of that building, not the variable, what it could be. How many feet above the surface of the earth does it sit? Therefore, the ridge caps to all of our houses flow. They might flow with the street, they might flow, opposite to give a different feeling. And so that is all totally designed and thought about. But you can have varied architecture within those boxes and those massing frameworks, and that adds interest to the street. We also really talk a lot about restraint. We don't want a bunch of houses with egos jumping out at everybody as you walk along. That's kind of disturbing. It could be great architecture, but if everybody's trying to get your attention, that's a problem. So we really have sort of, a wonderful restraint. Each house has to have one architecture. Every architect has to defend what the architectural style is. And we allow occasional explanations or exclamations, but every house cannot be an exclamation into itself, because all of a sudden it just fades.
So I have a few comments on all of this. The first, though, with that omega, as you call it, it's also the way that waters, rivers, streams flow naturally. They never flow in a perfectly straight line. They're always meandering like that. And like you said, you even did kind of go with the water sources, but that is a certain natural flow to go meander like that. And then
just like people.
Yeah. So it's wonderful, it's really responsive, and it's also was responsive to the land. Like you said, you worked with Phil and how he's become the planner, and in him doing so, he wasn't thinking intellectually. You guys were listening to what the land wanted, to respond to the land, the energy, the vibration of the land. And then this whole idea of like creating this envelope for the zoning of the buildings, but not specifically what's there. But also a very interesting thing that you were just finishing on this topic of designs that are like, look at me, I'm so overly designed. And that's when I started learning design, I thought in those terms. And then I came to understand that actually the best design is invisible. You don't even know that it's designed because it just looks just so right and natural. Like even in designing my book did end up having a little bit of a look at me kind of design. And it doesn't just look like old fashioned, but really the best designed books you open up and they just have old fashioned type. The pages all look normal and you're not distracted by the book trying to be like, look at me, look at how cleverly designed I am. It's just normal. And the same with downtown Serenbe. You walk down that street and the buildings just look like they belong there and been there. They're just very normal, but that took a lot of designing to make them look so simple and fitting in.
If you like it from a visual image, you should come walk it.
Oh, I will be coming to visit,
also
of course.
Feel it, because this is the big thing. Maybe everyone doesn't identify that they're feeling it, but without an exception, people say your pictures do not do this justice, and they can't figure it out. And for a while, I tried to figure that out. We would take videos, we would take pictures, different angles, great photographers. And finally, I sat back and said, no, because when you're here, you feel it as well as see it. And there's no way you can capture feeling with a flat image.
Right. Oh my God. So that's great. We can mention that now so that people can, who are listening and looking at this, kind of just get a slight sense that it goes so far beyond just this design and what it looks like, that it's actually making a place that feels very different because it's aligned, like you say, it's biophilic. It's not just ecological, environmental. It's not just new urbanism. It's this overall response to living in creating a space that creates a certain feeling. So,
and I think we all, we can agree that the earth is a living organism, and if you would deny that, and so if you attach something to any living organism, and it's imposed on it, there's going to be a rigid vibration coming from that living system or animal. And so this is why it's so important to develop in relationship with nature so that there is a compatible agreement, almost, if you will, between where you are placing houses and the houses you place with. And so this is why you don't feel this rigidity that we feel in most developments and most of our developed areas, because it's all been imposed. We've scraped the earth and we've imposed what we think we need as humans in efficiency versus understanding the place that we want to put these buildings, and think of that as a living organism that we're coming and we are inhabiting along with that living organism. So that's why it feels very different to walk the streets here.
It's
You know,
great. I know. And of course,
you
besides,
you see people smiling and waving, and you just feel it.
and of course, it is open to visitors to come and visit, and people do come to the restaurants and the inn that you have there, and just get to experience. And then also, you do host these conferences about teaching what Serenbe is about, which of course I should come and attend at some point. Do you want to just mention that a little bit?
Yes, we have one coming up in October. There's some seats left. If anyone, a couple seats left, I think, go to the webpage, nygrenplacemaking.com. And we've, as we've become more known, and there's a lot of stories about all the various things and the changes in people's lives, we're getting tremendous interest, and I'm running out of time to talk to people. The days are just so long. And so we've tried to figure out how to help share what we've learned in some ways. And so we've created a podcast, which is Serenbe Stories. People can go on and hear that journey. But we've also developed Nygren Placemaking Conference. It's coming up in October. And it's 2.5 days. And we bring in the people who were in local government as we came up with these ideas of rezoning. We bring in our banker who left the bank, and he's now one of our builders here. The incredible journeys, our civil engineers. So we bring in everyone who's been part of our journey, as well as some residents, our arts, and then we walk to the various things. And we also do individual consulting if people want to have a one-off with us. And then we have, in the spring, we have the Biophilic Institute. And so you can go there too. And this is more for thought leaders and policymakers. And so the idea there is we bring people in and it's a conversation, and people come year after year and we build this conversation on what's going on, what needs to happen. And so these are the various ways that we're trying to share what we've learned with a broader public.
Yeah, so that's great. Nygrenplacemaking.com. Like you say, besides being able to come to the conference at the place, you have been consulting, with all kinds of communities all around the world in implementing these concepts, this biophilic design. So that's a great resource that you have. So besides having nygrenplacemaking.com and biophilicinstitute.com as these websites and these conferences that you host at Serenbe, I wanted to touch on just some other stuff that we overlap in, like how I think about creating new earth environments and what you've been implementing there. And so that this whole idea that besides the design, the architecture, the layout, the agriculture, the community, like that, but the more subtle aspects, how does the place sound? Like, how do you regulate those kind of things? And that's something that we were, you've been writing an article. I write about that in my book, and so we might as well just talk a little bit about your approach to, how sound is regulated or thought about in creating a biophilic community.
Sound is one of those things we don't think about much. It's something that's around us. It's kind of like the air we breathe, the water we drink. It's just there.
We don't think about it until someone's got their weed whacker going all day long, or their neighbor dog keeps barking. Then you think about it because it's infringing on you. Or like I lived in New York City for a long time, and I lived in the back of the apartment building. And one day they installed a huge air conditioning unit right outside my window where it had been peaceful and quiet for years. All of a sudden, I now have this extremely loud machine blasting right outside my window. So yes, we don't think about it until it becomes an issue.
Well, exactly. So, but we don't think about it. And I would suggest that while you were living in New York, there was a lot of sounds in the background all the time that you just accepted. That disturbed you because it was actually in your face. It was right next to you. But so many times it's just a constant buzz or sound, and because we don't think there's an alternative, we just shut it out. We don't think about it. But our whole nervous system, I mean, sound is a vibration. And so even though we try to shut it out with our mind, our bodies are feeling the vibration of those sounds all the time. And it's very disturbing, and there are alternatives. All the things that disturb us and are making us sick today, there's alternatives to them. And so that's what we really looked at Serenbe. What was that? So sound. We're talking about sound. That's a good example. So I hate those compressors. And if you have a dense area, and you got all these condensers, it's that constant buzz in the spring and fall. But geothermal technology, I mean, about maybe 2.5%. The Heat Pump Association, I think, has reported about 2.5% of our heating and cooling is geothermal. Yet it's this incredible resource that's using the constant temperature of the earth to either heat or cool for water-cooled air handlers. And there is no noise, and they don't take all this position outside your window or in your backyard. And they cut your energy costs, your demand for energy, by 50%. Because if you're using air, you're having to take warm air to cool it in the summer and cold air to heat in the winter. And there's a much larger range of temperature that you're having to take your forced air to than if you're using the constant temperature of the Earth's water. So it's just the most practical cost-wise. Now, it's more expensive to put in, but really no maintenance, no sound, and the silent benefit is huge. But that's one. I mean, how we handle our trash. I hate these big garbage trucks that have the beep up noise and kind of so we have simple. Outside everybody's front door, buried in the ground, is a trash can. People walk our streets and they don't even see them. And we have a electric vehicle that picks it up twice a week. And if it's trash, it goes in a solid bag. If it's recycled, it goes in a clear bag. And if it's compost, it goes in a compost bag that goes to our compost center. And so we don't have these big trucks in our community, and that's a huge thing. Those trucks coming through at 6 a.m, beeping, and it's a visual pollution. The people that have these Herbie-Kirby's, these containers that sit out on their curbs or at their front, and so we've solved the noise and the visual problem. Our entire city, we have night sky regulations, so you can't let light escape into the atmosphere where we don't need it. What's more, we've engaged artists to create all of our street lights, and it throws the lights down on the sidewalk, And in Motto, our streetlights, they're I call them towers of new thought, but they throw patterns of art on all the sidewalks as you walk by. So it's not only light, but it's patterns and creative iron. So, all these things that irritate us and we put it at our back of the mind thinking there's no solution. There are great solutions, and they're mostly common sense things. So it's our society, our purchasing society, our planners, our builders, we have what I call rut thinking. And many times the regulations that have been in place out of fear have just knocked all the creativity out of our desire to do something different. And it ends up just people in this rut thinking that this is the way life has to be, that this is what you have to do. And so it is.
Well, a big part of this is that we have in effect, our government and our zoning and all of this stuff that actually does not embrace what you've done at Serenbe. You actually had to go and make new laws for that. And if you were to try to do what you've done at Serenbe, like here where I live, it's not even allowed. It's not in the zoning laws. So
the governor is not a monster that arrived on spaceship. The government is us. So?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, yes, it is.
It is. It's made up of people.
It's made up of people, but there's certain systems that are in place that are somewhat corrupt to keep enforcing these rules that benefit these corporations that benefit from it. And, if you try to change it, they're not willing to, because there are businesses that thrive on, these rules.
But that's rut thinking it can't change, and I'm saying it can.
You can, because you've done it.
We have challenged those systems. We've challenged those. We have broken the law and told them to arrest us, and we'll call the press because we have common sense. And I'm not doing it just, I have experts. I have the documentation, and I have yet to be arrested, or shut down, because there are stupid laws. And when you bring the spotlight to them and show them how stupid some of them are, then you can change it. And we have to stand up as people and not see the government as some foreign outsider. It's us. It's our neighbors that form our governments.
Right. So no, you are the perfect example of, going up against that and changing it and making it a reality. So that's why our conversation today is so inspiring, so great. I think we covered all the things I wanted to get on an initial interview. Down the line, we could have you back to go into more detail or as things progress. But I'm really just been so grateful and honored that you were able to join me today. Like you said, your time is limited. I hopefully will be able to come visit Serenbe at some point, and we'll maybe attend one of those, placemaking conferences, so I can, further my abilities to implement exactly what you've been doing. So,
if you'll just promise me one thing, you'll turn that hope into reality and actually come walk the streets with me.
Oh, no, I absolutely will.
Okay.
See when, hopefully sooner than later, but for sure, I will be there to meet in person and get to experience and feel Serenbe. And of course, anyone watching this or listening to this, you can do that as well. So thanks once again. And if please remember to hit like so other people will get to see this more, and hit subscribe to keep the YouTube channel going for Portal to the New Earth. And we'll see you in our next talk. And thanks again, Steve. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thanks very much.
Enjoyed it. Take care.